Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of
Hart and Hustle.
I'm the Hart.
I'm the Hustle. Greg Powers here, Director of Recruiting at Dave Campbell's Texas Football.
Mallory Hartley, the Associate Producer here at Dave Campbell's Texas Football and Dave Campbell's Texan Live.
Pretty excited about episode 2 because, episode 1, we came out of the gates pretty strong, talking about Baylor, talking about Red Oak, and I think that we're starting to now set the format for what this show is going to be, where we're talking about Texas teams, Texas talents, and this week we've got the Texas Longhorns, Austin Westlake, 2 Central Texas powerhouses in college football and high school football, respectively. But I'm excited about this episode because, episode 1 is like there's some pressure. Right? Episode 1, there's always some pressure. Episode 2, I hope that the fans can maybe get to know us a little bit better, kind of like what we do here at Dave Campbell specifically as the Director of Recruiting. I do the player rankings, cover. Recruiting's not a good word, I feel like, to use at Dave Campbell's. I don't find a problem with the word, but we concentrate on the rising talents in the Lone Star State. We're telling the stories of the players, and behind that we're doing rankings and that kind of stuff, just like we do in high school football. But we want to cover like the dudes across. Who are the dudes?
The dogs.
Who are the dogs that you need to know in Texas high school football? And I love the format of this show because we get to talk about some of the players who are going on to play at college, some of the big programs in the state, but then also kind of shine the spotlight on some of the top programs in the state and not concentrate on, like Austin Westlake is a team loaded with great talents, right? And there are always going to be some needle movers on some of these rosters, but we get to dive in and dig a little deeper on some of the talent specifically in some of these programs and some of the commitments that may be overlooked. I'm sure if you're talking Texas, you've heard a lot of Jonah Williams talk this week, but it's deeper than that, on their roster.
Yeah, and I like talking about these high school teams too, because like you just said, a lot of these players, like they're not looking to go Power 4, right? They're not looking to go G5. Like they're just looking to play ball. And that's kind of what our hope is with this show is to, obviously highlight the Power 5 recruits and then the top recruits in the state, right? But also maybe highlight a couple of those dogs that might be flying under the radar a little bit. So we'll kind of do that a little bit today. We'll talk about some dogs, but then we'll also talk about some guys that, maybe you haven't heard of or could be on the rise this coming season.
Well, thanks for your time, especially. This is week 1 of Texas high school football season. And for those fans that don't know this, as a producer here at Dave Campbell's, you're taking on a big thing this year.
Yes.
You're the producer of Texas Football Tonight, our marquee flagship show. Week 1's coming up. It's only a couple days away. How you feeling about moving into this weekend and producing that show? And for those that may not know about it, Texas Football Tonight on Dave Campbell's Texan Live is a show that's kind of like a red zone style show where we, flash around to some of the top games that we have on Texan Live. But I think, what is it, like more relaxed this year? Is that what your thought process is as like the producer, the big time producer of the show?
Yeah, that's fair to say. I'll also have help with our other associate producer, V&A Moreno. She'll also help me kind of behind the scenes.
Shout out to V&A. She always helps us out with lots of stuff.
Yeah, she always helps us out. But Ashley Pickle, Ishmael Johnson, and Greg Tepper will be on the desk, I should say. We're not going to have a desk. It's going to be more relaxed. They're just going to be guys talking football.
Have you had time to soak it in, or is it just been
not yet
pedal to the metal?
It's been pedal to the metal ever since Monday. I'd probably say ever since the beginning of August. It's been pedal to the metal since then, but I'm really, really excited. Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. You can watch it. Dave Campbell's Texas Football Tonight. You can watch it for free on TexanLive.com or our YouTube page, Dave Campbell's Texas Football, from 7:30 to 10 p.m. Kind of an NFL red zone type show where we're diving into different Texas high school football games around the state, talking to broadcasters, coaches, and just kind of having fun and hanging out and talking some high school football. You couldn't get better than that.
Our friends at North Texas help us out. Is there something like you're specifically nervous about for Friday? Like, what's one part or one aspect of the show? For those of you that may not know, like behind the scenes, you see the people up here at the desk talking, but there's tons of people mashing buttons and cutting highlights. I would say we have like a crew of 25 people behind the scenes making that show happen. And now you're kind of coordinating all that. Is there something that what's your most nerve-wracking thing to think about heading into Friday?
So we're in partnership with the University of North Texas. So we put on an internship. We actually actually utilize the UNT students in helping us create and put on this amazing show. We've got UNT students that help us with graphics, with highlight cutting, with camera operating, with audio even. Playback system on the Tria. I mean, we use students for most of this show. We couldn't do it without them. And we got to all meet the students last night for the first time for our first class.
So it was like your first group sesh?
Yeah, they were fantastic. So I wouldn't say that there's anything in particular that I'm really nervous about. I would just say that I'm just excited to get. I think it's more excitement rather than nerves. You know, like I just want week 1 to get here, and I just want to do the dang thing. You know what I mean? So
get it in your rearview mirror, so now you know what to expect for week 2.
Exactly. So really pumped. 7:30 p.m. Every Friday night for the rest of the football season. So very excited.
As your friend, colleague, and side-by-side cubicle mate. I don't really know what we should call our situation here.
Friends.
Our desks are next to each other here in the office. I'm really excited to see what the show is going to be, and then I know that you have a lot of fans here that are going to be interested to see how it goes. There's a lot of talent that's going to be on the air. You mentioned Tepper, Pickle, and Johnson, all tremendous talents. We love to listen to them talk, but behind the scenes, there are some very important people like yourself and VNA that we want to make sure that we take notice of it, and like we're excited for you guys.
Thank you. Well, maybe we'll have you on every once in a while. We'll see. Maybe talking some recruits. Speaking of talking some recruits, shall we get started?
Let's jump in.
All right. Should we head down to Austin?
Let's do it.
The Austin area, and maybe talk about the Texas Longhorns. I mean, they're kind of going to be really good this year, if I had to go out on a limb. We think. Let's flash it back to last year's recruiting class, right? Colin Simmons, obviously the headliner there.
For sure.
The defensive lineman out of Duncanville. You could even throw Kobe Black in there. They're playing Colorado State this weekend. Probably going to put up some big numbers on Colorado State, I would assume. Do you think we might get to see some of those recruits hopping in the game towards the end? Maybe we get to see Arch Manning there at quarterback a little bit.
Xavier Filsaime, maybe from McKinney. I think they had 3 players in our top 10 last year, and Simmons, Filsaime, and Black. I think those 3 guys are probably at the top of my list. There were some out-of-state guys that they signed. The receiver that they signed from the St. Louis area, his name escapes me off the top of my head. Brandon.
Ryan Wingo.
Yeah, dude.
He's a beast.
Yeah, he's amazing. I think
he's a beast.
I think we're going to see Ryan Wingo for sure.
Oh yeah.
And I think the reports that I've heard out of Austin regarding Colin Simmons have been very positive. And they lost some players in the secondary, so I think Filsaime and Kobe Black are guys who could really play anywhere in that secondary. So if they need somebody to step in, also their speed is indicative of special team success. So I think that maybe you could see them on special teams, and sometimes like your best players are making these tremendous plays on special teams out of the gate. But I do expect Colin Simmons to press the action and potentially get in. Of course, he's a speed rushing phenom. Maybe can spell Trey Moore, who came in from UTSA, as like one of those pure pin your ears back edge rushers that Texas can employ, because they're going to need to get pressure on Braden Fowler-Nicolesi at Colorado State, former Alito star.
Former
Alito star. That dude, he's a baller.
He is.
So
I watched him last year against Colorado when they played.
Yeah, I know that Colorado State's probably a big underdog, but something I think to watch in that game is I think they're going to be able to move the football through the air, unless that they can disrupt his thought process and make him get off schedule with his throws. I think that you're going to see Colorado State have some success moving the football. I know that everybody wants to walk into week 1 and like stomp down their opponent, but Colorado State might be a little bit better than people think that they are, just because they have experience coming back under center, and that's something I think is very important in game 1.
Absolutely. I think so too. Obviously, great class coming in for the 2024 Texas Longhorns, but let's look ahead to the class of 2025. Now, we still got a little bit, obviously, before we get a full class count, right? We're kind of in that halfway spot a little bit. Let's talk about some of the big stars, right? Let's talk about actually the top 5 in the class of 2025, not just from Texas, but overall. So you've got Jonah Williams from Galveston Ball, Khalik Lockett from Saxe. You've got Lance Jackson from Pleasant Grove.
Yep.
Elijah Barnes from Dallas Skyline. And then Nick Townsend from Spring Decaney. those are the top 5 recruits in the class of 2025 for the Texas Longhorns, and they all happen to be from the state of Texas. What does that say about how the Longhorns are recruiting in the state of Texas right now?
Well, I wanted to talk about Texas this week specifically because we have some Texas fans in our office, and
we have too many Texas fans in our office. Just kidding. They're actually tied with North Texas fans. Like there's the same amount of Texas fans and North Texas fans. So we're always going back to back.
I'll give the edge to North Texas probably in our office,
Correct.
But there are some Texas fans, and Texas fans are bigger recruiting fans than North Texas fans are for sure because they're recruiting at a different level. I mean, North Texas has done a tremendous job, but Texas just recruits on a national scale. It's a little bit different when you're tracking the recruitment of Jonah Williams, right? Because every big school in the country was really trying to get his attention, and that was a huge win for Texas. So talking to some of our Texas fans over the last couple of weeks, there was some concern since DeCorian Moore had made his commitment to Oregon, and I told them like, hey, look, like you're not getting Michael Fasusi. You know, I've been in my mind, I'd have him penciled into OU for a long time. I just felt like Michael Fasusi was an OU lean. Of course, that's the top rated offensive lineman in the state who picked the Sooners recently over Texas and Texas A&M. I think the DeCorian Moore thing was like a shock because people really, because of his connection at Duncanville, his connection to Colin Simmons, I thought a lot of people really had put DeCorian Moore in the win category for Texas.
I think I did too.
Well, behind the scenes, I wrote a Texas commitment article about DeCorian Moore. Like we had some quotes and everything about his skills and all that. So like we were like ready to go with a DeCorian Moore to Texas thing. But what I think helped win out, and I go back to my very first talk with DeCorian back in the day. Oregon was one of the, I think it was the first school he ever visited, one of his very first offers. They hired Rashad Samples, which was a Duncanville connection. You know, the son of legendary,
Reggie Samples, head coach there.
The son of Duncanville's head coach. There was just some tie-ins at Oregon that I think that made that really appealing for Moore. They're also a huge player in the NIL category right now because they're really stepping up to the plate, getting a lot of good offers out to these players, which moves the needle for these top tier guys. All things being equal, if you were to take a job, you would, if you like both jobs equally, you would take the job that pays you the most money.
Yeah, right. Well, and speaking of Oregon too, Will Stein, their offensive coordinator, did come from Texas too. I believe he was at UTSA before he went to Oregon. So there's another Texas connection there. A lot of these players, we're seeing Evan Stewart as well, who's a transfer from Texas A&M, going to Oregon too. So yeah, you're right there.
Long segue to say the Texas fans in our office were like worried about worried about the class, and then I dug in a little bit deeper with it. I was like, why? You know, they're going to have a top 10 class nationally, maybe fight for the top 5. There are a couple of guys out there pending right now on this commitment list that they're really heavy on. That's Michael Terry from Alamo Heights and Jamie French from Florida. I can't remember exactly which high school Jamie French is at, but I watched him play at a 7-on-7 event earlier this year. He's probably the second best receiver that I've seen with my own 2 eyes in this class. Him and DeCorian Moore are 1 and 2. And that's huge. I think that there's a legit argument between those two because they're totally different players. What I love about DeCorian Moore is the veteran presence that he brings, and that he's like one of those guys that plays hard every snap. I don't know the inner details of what Jamie French brings to the table, except for he is a freak show. Like he's a guy who people pay attention to. Every player at the event knew who he was, and everybody wanted to get on the field with him. He's that guy who has that aura around him. So there's some big targets out there for Texas right now. We believe that Texas is in a really good spot for French, and the Michael Terry thing is really up in the air. I
was going to ask you something about that too, because I remember you and William Wilkerson, who is the head of our website design, kind of inner workings. The inner workings of the very, very smart guy, Texas grad, huge Texas fan. He was asking you the other day about Michael Terry and kind of what the outlook on his decision was kind of looking like. And you were kind of saying like, I don't really know. They're obviously in the running for it, but also, do they need a guy like Michael Terry right now?
Yeah, I mean, everybody needs a Michael Terry.
Yeah, right.
He's a freak. He's the number 12 player in our rankings. Wide receiver, tight end type of player, 6'2", 215 pounds. On that roster, I think that he plays a similar position as, the pickup that they got from Spring to Caney and Nick Townsend. If they both end up playing on offense, I think it's a similar position. Townsend could easily flip over and play defense, as could Terry. Terry's probably a little bit more wide receiver-y.
And that's what I was kind of saying. Maybe not necessarily like need a guy like Michael Terry, but like they've got Khalid Lockett too from Saxe. So I feel like they're kind of similar players.
Yeah. They're similar but quite different. I think that Terry's like an H-back style player, like a big flex type wide receiver, whereas Khalid, I think, is like a true outside weapon, 6'2", 175 pounds. He's a deep ball winner, a 50-50 ball winner, a guy that I think when you look at this Texas commit list, like this is a guy that they had to get in this class after they missed out on Decorium Moore, after they didn't land a commitment from Andrew Marsh, some of those guys that are in this class that they had targeted earlier, Tanu Hines, some of the in-state guys. I think Khalid Lockett was very important to this recruiting class, and he's an elite talent. So I don't want to overlook like his skill set when we're talking about these other guys. But what I do think is that Oregon and Nebraska have done a tremendous job in the Michael Terry recruitment. And I'm a big watch what they do, don't listen to what they say guy. And Terry took a recent unofficial visit to Nebraska right before the season started, and that put off the bells inside of my head of like, who goes to Nebraska right before the football season starts? It's not like a close trip at home. And Nebraska, and Nebraska has been like a school on his list for a long time. I think a lot of people really thought it was going to be Oregon or Texas, but I'm not discounting the Cornhuskers in this Michael Terry sweepstakes, because I think that he really could go to any one of those schools. And Terry is the lone prospect left in the DCTF Hot 100 who hasn't committed. 99 out of the 100 have already committed. That's never happened before the start of the season. And I think Terry could commit at any time. Like, I wouldn't be surprised, if I didn't even get this podcast up in time, that Terry committed. And that's the danger.
Could be right now at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. That you have when
you're doing recruiting stuff is that it's always changing and in flux. So by the time you're watching this, Michael Terry could come off the board, because I think he could commit before the first game of the season, and that's ticking, right? Like it's coming down to the wire. But the Horns are going to finish with a top 10 national class. They're going to try to press into the top 5. Some big commitments from French and Terry could help them do that. But they've done a tremendous job out of the gates. You mentioned those 5 guys. Jonah Williams is the highest rated. Might have missed on some in-state offensive linemen in Ty Haywood and Michael Fasusi. They may have to hit the transfer portal for some offensive linemen and defensive linemen, but a lot of colleges are doing that right now, trying to get the beef that has experience. You don't have to develop those guys as much, or you can take some more developmental guys as you hit the transfer portal with guys who are ready to play in the trenches. And I think that that's a good recruiting strategy, a good sound recruiting strategy, especially as it relates to recruiting Texas, because you can go in and take a developmental guy and 2 or 3 years down the road, he's your starter whenever the transfer guys are by and large gone.
And I know that we talked about this the first time that we talked about the Longhorns. I guess that was probably 3 months ago, and it's crazy how much has changed even since then, right? We were still talking about if Khalid Lockett was gonna commit. Right. It just happens so quickly. That's the world of recruiting, and we talked about this a little bit, but Texas now obviously being in the SEC and being that second SEC power in the state of Texas. What does that do for recruiting for Texas? And I guess in the state, does that kind of pull things away from Texas A&M? Maybe I'm a freaking
curmudgeon when it comes to this, but I really don't feel like anything change. No matter what changes for Texas, Texas is going to be the same.
Texas is going to be Texas, right?
Same with Texas A&M, OU, LSU. When those programs are like involved in a recruitment, they're the big dogs in it. They have an expectation when they offer somebody that they're going to land them,
right?
And they should. And there are going to be some traditional recruiting battles, between OU and Texas, between Texas and Texas A&M, because they're in the SEC. It's going to hold a little bit more weight because those fans of other programs like Alabama, Georgia, LSU. They're going to be interested in those recruitments now as well. Those are the biggest fan bases as far as the media markets are concerned. So it does tip the scales from a national landscape, a national perspective type thing, where more eyes nationally maybe on you. Whatever you do is maybe under the spotlight a little bit more. But Texas, since I've been covering recruiting, it's been since 2004 in the Lone Star State. I've never worried about who's recruiting for Texas, who the head coach is, who the assistant coaches are. Texas is Texas in the Lone Star State, and they're going to have sway with the top kids in the state no matter what. Same with Texas A&M and LSU. So the names are going to be out there. The recruiting board's going to be full of top tier stars who are going to be the best players from their cities, the best players in their ISDs, the top players in their districts. All these guys are going to be like considering Texas. And when I look at this list, some of the names that jump to the top of my head are like Port Neches Groves, offensive lineman Jackson Christian, a guy who doesn't get talked about a lot in this recruiting class, but is a straight up menace in the trenches. And he may not be a ready to play on day one type of guy, but he's a mean son of a gun that has the size of an offensive tackle, but has the power of an interior offensive lineman. And those are the type of guys that you need to build recruiting classes around with the depth, right? And you can then go out into the transfer portal and specifically grab guys at positions of need that are going to make your team instantly better for next year. And then you have these guys learning from them and ready to go. Jonathan Cunningham from North Crowley, extremely athletic, 6'2", 190-pound outside linebacker prospect who's had a tremendous career at North Crowley. Needs some development once he gets in to high school or into college from high school. Even though he's playing at the 6A level and he's been playing at a high level there, he's going to bulk up in the weight room, and that's going to change his body, and that's going to change the way that he plays, and that's going to take some adjustment time. And there's guys like Caleb Chester at Fort Bend Marshall who are probably not rated as highly as some of the other guys, but Chester's probably ready to play at an early stage. He's got a lot of experience playing. He's missed some time due to injury, but Chester's like a guy who I don't see a lot of holes in his game when I watch his tape to be like, oh, well, this guy needs some seasoning before he gets into college. I think that he's a guy who could step in and like provide depth. Even though he's like a 3-star by most of the recruiting services, I think he's a guy that can come in and be an early contributor.
It's kind of cool. It's like looking at the Texas roster. It's kind of like Georgia. I always say it's like, oh, your backup is also a 4-star. Your third string could be a 3-star. It's like they're just loaded with talent, you know, and they just seem to reload every single year. So really excited to see what the Texas Longhorns do this year. Week 1 game against Colorado State should be an easy win, but a fun one to start off the year.
And Texas, I think about talent development. Right? They've always gotten the players. It's about whether they're developing them to get to the NFL, developing them to be the top college football players in the nation. And I think we saw that start to flip and turn to a positive thing for what Steve Sarkisian's doing there at UT, because last year they were well represented in the draft, and this year they're going to be well represented in the draft. So they're not only landing these top players now they're starting to develop them. And I think that's the most important thing. If I'm a Longhorns fan, that's what I've been nervous about, is like, why are we getting these top players and having no draft picks? It's because the talent development wasn't there. Well, now it's there.
Now it's there. Absolutely. Well, let's stay in Austin.
All right.
And let's take a visit down to Austin Westlake, the home of the Chaparrals. Did I say that correctly?
The
Chaps. Yeah, the Chaps. Let's take a look at this team real quick. They're loaded. Absolutely bloated.
No doubt.
So let's start on the offensive side of the ball here. One of the players that stood out to me was obviously quarterback Rees Wise, 2026 kid. And I pulled up his film before we started this. And the one thing that stood out to me the absolute most, and I'll see if you agree with me on this, the accuracy that guy has. He's got talent in his arm. He's got talent in his legs. He can make plays, kind of whichever way. But he can also make his receivers, he can turn every single one of his receivers, it seems like, into a deep threat because of his accuracy. And
as a sophomore, he showed tremendous poise. That's what I thought was really impressive about him. I got to watch their game in the playoffs last year when they beat Lake Travis on a team that went 14-1. Austin Westlake fell one game short of a state championship appearance last year, and they have most of the talent. They've lost Tyler Nape, who signed with Cal, but most of the talent is coming back to this year's squad. And Weiss is going to be a year older. He has tremendous poise. He was the district newcomer of the year. He's already started to pick up recruiting attention. He's got offers from Nebraska, Oklahoma State, and Texas Tech off the top of my head. So there's like some big P4 programs that are already in the hunt for him. I love what you said about his accuracy. I think something that you shouldn't sleep on when you're talking about his game is his athleticism. He doesn't
make plays with his feet.
Yeah, he doesn't look like, when you look at him off the hoof, though, you're not like, oh, this guy's going to tear it up running the ball. But he had over 400 yards rushing last year. And he
can throw on the run, too. Yeah.
Multiple touchdowns on the ground. So he's a guy who can move the pocket, extend plays, and he's a very savvy leader who played on an Austin Westlake team that I think of in my head is like, when you think of Austin Westlake, what do you think of? Quarterbacks.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So, like, he's playing for an Austin Westlake team. He's going to be a 3-year varsity starter at Austin Westlake, which, like, has never happened that I can ever think about. So just to think about the type of numbers that he's going to put up there and how much better he's going to be this year. And we'll know right away. We're going to know right away, like, where this team is at, because they play Prosper at Mary Hardin Baylor in game 1. And that's a fun matchup.
Which I do want to get to in a second. But first, let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball. We got a ton of great offensive players, right, that we're looking forward to. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball, right? You've got Elliott Shaper.
Love him.
Love him. I watched his film. I think he's fantastic. He's athletic. He can get to the quarterback quickly, wreak havoc in the backfield. I think he's a fantastic linebacker.
Steal for Duke?
That's a steal for Duke, I think. I would say.
You would be happy to have him on Michigan State, right? Like, Shaper is a baller, had over 100 tackles last year. To me, I look at him and I feel like he's like one of the guys who's being cheated in the rankings, who's being 100%. Cheated in like the preseason talk, because like he is an alpha dog on defense. I think he had 13 tackles for a loss and 9 sacks last season to go with like 108 tackles, but he is like the field general, right? Like he understands, reads and diagnoses.
He's the quarterback of the defense.
Yeah, he reads and diagnoses extremely well. He seems to really have a good grasp of what's going on play to play. The team kind of gravitates towards him, and the defense is kind of led by like the way that he's playing. This is an Austin Westlake defense that is coached by Tony Salazar, who is known to be like in coaching circles one of the top
defensive-minded guys.
Yeah.
Yes,
so he's like a tremendous defensive coach.
Right. Well, and just look at the defensive line too. You've got Maddox Flint. He's got great size. I think he's agile as well. And then you've got Connor Vosick, who was the brother of Colton Vosick, who is now at Texas, which is kind of funny. But what do you think of this defensive line? I mean, and we can talk about them in a minute when they go up against one of the best offensive lines, I'd say, in Prosper and Connor Carty. But what do you think about this defensive line, and kind of, is this where they're going to win a lot of their games, is in the trenches?
Well, I love what they bring to the defensive front. What they do a really good job of too is in the rotation. They rotate these guys in and out very effectively. Vosick, I feel like he actually committed last week to Air Force. This is a steal for Air Force. Like, Vosick is a P4 level talent. He had a shoulder injury last year, something that like kept him from having as many meaningful snaps as he probably wanted to have to put on his tape. But it would not surprise me or shock me in the least is that if he comes out of the gate strong early this season, and a lot of big time programs start to try to get him to flip his commitment from Air Force. I think it was a smart and savvy decision to announce a commitment before the start of your senior season, right? Which most people try to do now. That's like the typical process for a high school kid, is to make sure he has his decision out of the way. It's good to have a security blanket, but I think Vosick is better than Air Force. Sorry, Air Force fans, if you're hearing that. Vosick is better than Air Force, no doubt about it. And you got Colin Devine, and you got Maddox Flint, and there's a long list of guys on that defensive front at Austin and Westlake who are needle movers for me, and guys who I think are going to match up favorably well against a Prosper offensive line unit that features 5 P4 dudes up front. And like, what I think Westlake did a pretty good job of this year is they've stepped up their game in the non-conference part, or the non-district part of the schedule. So that they're playing like they play Prosper, they play Cibolo Steel,
Katie Tompkins, I believe.
There was one more game on their schedule that was like a big
Katie Tompkins, and then I know at the very end of the season they'll play in district Dripping Springs, which will be a big game too.
The Lake Travis game is always a huge game, but they're testing themselves more in the non-district schedule, which I think will benefit them come playoff time. But I'm putting Austin Westlake, like, people probably aren't picking them to win the state championship. I don't know why. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I only pay attention to what Tepper's saying, right? Like, he's my high school analyst.
Correct.
That I go to. So I've got Austin Westlake as that team that I think is like a sneaky favorite to potentially win a state championship this year, because they return so much talent. That talent is well coached, and they have a cool and calm leader under center.
Well, and then they got I think they're ranked number 4 in our DCTF rankings, right? AP official rankings.
Yeah.
I think they're ranked number 4. So the computer likes them, I mean, like,
well, I'd imagine that's behind Duncanville, DeSoto, and North Shore. So maybe there are people picking them to win a state championship. Of course, their path is going to be pretty tough. I have the Cibolo Steel Austin Westlake game circled on my own personal calendar. I'm trying to attend that game this year, and that's going to be a fun game to see those matchups.
So fun. Oh my gosh, there's going to be a lot of great matchups in Austin Westlake's schedule this year. But what a fun time in Austin.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll have to go back to Austin on one of our future journeys on the Hart.
We should.
On the Hart and Hustle podcast. But I think maybe for next week, it's got to be H-Town, right? Like, we got to
H-Town, hold it down.
Yeah, we got to talk about some H-Town. I think maybe Houston Cougars and how Coach Fritz is doing out of the gates down there recruiting, and maybe we'll find a team to spotlight in the greater Houston area. Probably a partner at Texan Live where you can watch one of their games.
I like it. He's Greg Powers, the director of recruiting at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. You can see all of his fine work at texasfootball.com/recruiting. Same time next week, Powers?
Let's do it. Heart and Hustle.
Let's do it.